Greetings, everyone. Can we just get someone to indicate to us on the chat if the sound is coming through clearly? Yes, okay. Welcome everyone to the National Health Laboratory Service as well as the National Institute for Occupational Health. For those that don't know the institutes, the NHLS provides a diagnostic service to 80% of the South African population, and NIOH primarily looks at occupational health issues in ensuring a healthy, safe and sustainable workplace. We have been running a series of training sessions and information sessions, and today's session is very important, and it's going to be on personal protective equipment, the do's, the don'ts, and who should be wearing the PPE. While we do not know all the answers to some of the questions we get, we think that through our collaborative approach, we can find workable solutions and best practice so that we can mitigate risk of COVID in the workplace. Just some announcements to make during the presentations. You will be muted. Plus, please make use of the chat bubble or the Q&A tab to write down your questions. We will have a question and answer session at the end. For all the questions we are unable to answer, we will respond and communicate on email or put it up on our website. Also to note, all our presentations and demonstrations are recorded and they will be available on our website. And the website details will be shared to you during the session. Just another announcement, tomorrow we will be doing a session on mental health with a focus on health workers. So we invite you to join us tomorrow as well. And an invitation has gone out to our client list. With that, I'd like to hand over to our program director, Mr. Ashraf Ratcliffe, who will take you through the proceedings for today, and I wish you well.
Thank you very much. That was Dr. Tanusha Singh, the head of our NIH COVID-19 outbreak response team, responsible for this Zoom session and the 14 other sessions we've done since March, the beginning of March, and more to follow. The program for today is looking particularly at a vexing question, and it's been ongoing debates, and I think the scientific evidence and guidance around this have been shifting, and it's still an ongoing debate, especially in resource-constrained contexts like our own. That's personal protective equipment. Our training session is specifically focusing on PPE, the equipment and clothing required particularly by frontline workers. That is part of our essential services categories, as well as the general aspects of PPE for the other workplaces, and particularly also for our return to work. Our next sequence, is proper selection and use of PPE by our colleague Jeanette Mangani, followed by do's and don'ts about gloves by Anna Fourie, and then the demonstration of hand washing and sanitizing by Munya Muvali, and that's followed by the very practical demonstration also on donning and doffing of gloves and respirators by Tabang Duba. So we've got quite a jam-packed program, and we will give you a sense of what resources are available online on our website, etc. And then we want to save as much time for a question and answer session. So I'm not going to delay any further, but to remind you that in the chat box bubble at the bottom is where you have to type your questions on the presentation sequence that you're going to hear. And the Q&A, we're going to try and cover as much as possible of those questions. I invite my colleague Jeanette Mangani, and I'm going to ask my colleague Glenn just to prepare the slides for Jeanette. Please, Jeanette, welcome.
Okay, thank you very much, Ashraf, and thank you, Tanisha, for the introduction. I titled my talk, All We Know About PPE. The reason is being that there may be some of the information that we don't know and you may know. So what I'm going to share with you today is everything that we heard, we know, we read, and so forth. And we have tried to incorporate all the questions that have been sent to us before this session. And some of the questions were sent during the past sessions, which we included a presentation on PPEs. So I just want to make clarity that what we know about PPE today is specific to PPE used in a workplace. So as a start, I just want to mention to you that the use of PPE fall under the primary prevention within the workplaces. So I'm trying to get my slides to move. Okay, so there was a question about who is responsible to provide PPEs. So I thought I should begin my presentation by clarifying that question, that it is the duty of the employer to ensure that PPE are provided to all employees. In fact, I just want to highlight a few things which fall under the duty of employers. As a start, according to Section 8 of the OSH Act, the employer must ensure that every workplace is safe and without risk to its employees. And the employer can also include other minimum proportional measures, in this case, which are relevant to COVID, which can be education and training to employees about all necessary information with regards to COVID. They can also introduce other measures such as practical social distancing. In this instance, most of the employers, they have introduced virtual communication for meetings. They have postponed contact with clients where they have cancelled some of the services where it required employees to visit to client premises. And we must also adhere to keeping social distancing between 1.5 and 2 meters away. So we can also look at encouraging hand hygiene within the workplaces. It's also the responsibilities of the employer to promote that. And in addition to promote respiratory hygiene, and people need to be educated about coughing or sneezing into a flex elbow, or where feasible, they can use tissue and dispose it in a closed bin. So I just want to dwell more on what is it that informs the use of the PPE. So as we can see here that under the hierarchy of control, this is the traditional hierarchy of control, it's showing that the PPE is a last result after you have exhausted other means of control measures and you find that you are failing, or in combination of other measures. However, the expectation is the use of PPE should always be thought of as a last means of exposure control. And when we look at this traditional hierarchy of control, you can see that it's indicating that there should be a less amount of PPE use in relation to the other means, which is about elimination and substitution and so forth. So when I look at COVID, I see this hierarchy of control of infection, which is more, I find it more realistic when we look at COVID, because it's a pandemic. We were not prepared for that. We didn't have control measures in place to deal with on a routine basis. So it is expected that people will use more of personal protective equipment than all other control measures. And by saying this, I'm not advocating that people should spend their revenues on personal protective equipment. They should still consider other means where possible to engineer the hazard where possible. What we are saying is that in a healthcare setup or in this situation with COVID, we may still use a lot of personal protective equipment. So there was a question that who and should be given PPE, and what is it that informs the use of PPE? So I've started at home in South Africa. We have a document which was released by the Department of Employment and Labor. It is called Workplace Preparedness with regard to COVID-19. So they are recommending that all employers should go back to basics and do hazard identification and risk assessment. That way they will be able to identify those employers who need personal protective equipment and which type of equipment that they should be issued with. They further gave examples of PPE in that document, which they highlighted the use of gloves, goggles, face shields, face masks, gowns, etc. So they also highlighted different risk groups of occupations, and they also assisted employers in terms of those who do not have risk assessment, that they can really categorize their occupation according to those proposed risk group, from low risk, medium, high, and very high. So I have given you a link where you can go in and check, and if it really needs or meet your setting, you can apply that. And by saying this, I'm not saying that by applying guidelines it replaces hazard identification and risk assessment. The question is because many of you who joined, you are wondering that I haven't done risk assessment. What happened now? How do I inform the use of PPE? If you don't have the risk assessment, and if you cannot do it now, there are a lot of guidelines which you can make reference and adopt it to suit your own settings. However, risk assessment should be done. So there's also a guideline by OSHA, which is also talking about the similar thing that the Department of Employment and Labor has recommended. So in this guideline, they have categorized occupation in 3 categories. They have a low risk category where they are saying that in this case, there's minimal occupational contact with co-workers or general public. So they also give an example of office-based or whether you're doing administrative tasks, which do not really need you to be in contact with COVID patients. So in this case, they are saying that there is no PPE which is required. So the medium risk category, those are those employees that have frequent or close contact with customers or general public, which may include people who may be infected. So in this case, PPE may be required, however, may vary by tasks, and this decision has to be informed by the risk assessment outcome. So we also have a high risk category. So those are persons who are in close contact with COVID patients, or persons who are caring for COVID-19 patients, especially our frontline employees, our emergency services, our healthcare workers, they are included in this category. So your risk assessment really needs to be done for these people so that you can inform what PPE is appropriate for this category. However, it may include a full gear of all the necessary equipment which are needed for COVID-19. So there's also another guideline again in South Africa. This one is from the Western Cape government, provincial guideline for PPE use. They also highlighted a number of activities. This one is just a snapshot where I want to highlight different activities which require specific PPE. So if you don't have the risk assessment, you can also relate to what you're doing in your workplace. For example, this is a hospital setup where clinical staff who provide direct care to COVID-19 patients, they are expected to use a surgical mask, apron, gloves, and eye protection. However, the same clinical staff who are really performing aerosol generating procedures, the difference here, they will have to use an N95 respirator as opposed to a surgical mask. So here you haven't done a risk assessment still, but you need to be guided on what is it that is suitable for your setting. So you can take some of the information and apply and use it for your own knowledge. So we have the World Health Organization guideline. It seems to me that those guidelines are in agreement in terms of activities and types of PPE which are required. For example, here, the healthcare worker which is providing direct care also is required to use a medical mask, gowns, the same as what has been really proposed by the Western Cape government. And here they are also emphasizing the issue of aerosol generating procedure. They are talking about adding to the ones that have been mentioned previously, an apron, and replace the medical mask with a respirator, it's either N95 or FFP2. So the list is long, so you can go to these guidelines and look at what is relevant to your activities and different occupations that you have within your workplace and apply what is necessary in terms of the type of PPE which is needed. So I just want us to take us to other countries that WHO has given a guideline, and in South Africa, the Department of Employment and Labor, they sort of gave us a clear sense of how do we really inform the use of PPE. So other countries also, they are applying same or similar strategies. For example, UK has a guidance on COVID-19 personal protective equipment. Here they are talking about a number of equipment. In this case, they're only for aerosol generating procedures. Here they're talking about a filtering face piece class 3, which is FFP3. In other words, this one is similar to N99, not N95. And here they are also talking about a full face shield or a visor, which it was not mentioned in the previous guidelines. So it's something that you can see, but other than that, the others are the same in terms of the disposable fluid, repellent gown, and gloves. So when we go to Canada, they have updated their infection protective control measures for COVID. Then here, in their update, which I've never seen the outdated guideline, they're talking about a similar strategy as used by other guidelines. They are saying that healthcare workers providing direct care to patients with suspected or confirmed COVID, they should wear a surgical mask, isolation gown, gloves, goggle or face shield. Here you have a choice of the two. So they're also saying the same thing as was mentioned previously in terms of the aerosol generating medical procedures. They are saying you must use N95. In this case, Canada has emphasized that N95 needs to be field tested, and when you put it on, it has to be seal checked, and you must have an isolation room gown, and where possible, you can have a negative pressure room. So now we can go to India. So India, in a hospital setting, they're also confirming the same thing. They are saying here that if there is no aerosol generating activity, then you have an individual isolation room. They classify this risk as moderate. However, they are saying that there's no aerosol generating activity. However, you need to use an N95 respirator. So that's the difference when we compare to the other guidelines which I spoke about previously. They are talking about gloves, and here they are saying that their patient should be masked. So in other words, you should provide a mask, and that person before get attended by the caregiver or the healthcare worker. So they are saying that in terms of aerosol generating activity, this is a critical care and it has to be a high risk activity. So they expect employees who are performing this kind of activity to have a full complement of PPE. So this one is the Health Protection Surveillance Center in Ireland. They also have the current recommendation for use of PPE in the management of suspected or confirmed COVID. So what they are saying, again, is similar category with the other guidelines. They are saying that patients with respiratory symptoms suspected or confirmed then would require an aerosol generating procedure. Then the person needs to stick to hand hygiene, disposable single-use nitrile gloves. The first time we are really given a direction on whether you reuse or not. They're talking about single-use here. Long sleeve disposable gown. Here they're talking about FFP2 respirator, not N95. So FFP2 is equivalent to N95 in eye protection. So in terms of where there is aerosol generating procedure but do require high contact with the patient, they require hand hygiene, and the difference here is a surgical mask, and or rather who do not require an aerosol generating procedure. Instead of FFP2, they are suggesting a surgical mask. so which is similar to what has been mentioned in other guidelines. So now I just want to share with you, as we're learning from other countries, European Center for Disease Prevention and Control, they also have a guidance for PPE for care of patients with COVID. I also gave you a link where you can go in and check. So here they gave minimum composition of set of PPE for management of suspected or confirmed cases of COVID. So in this case, they're talking about respiratory protection. They are mentioning FFP2 or FFP3. So in other words, they are saying you can either, which are equivalent to N95 or N99. In terms of eye protection, they say goggles or face shield, body is the same, long sleeve, water resistant gown, and gloves. So what I liked about this link, because there was a question about how do we wear and remove all this PPE in a right way. So they do have information on proper sequencing of wearing and removing PPE in healthcare setting. So please, that question has been addressed. Go there and check, and they will show you what is it that we put in first and what is it that we remove last. So this slide is not very clear. I tried a number of times, but this is the government of Scotland. The first time that we see a guideline where they're talking about whether it's single use or repeat or not, and what is it that is needed for your activity. I will give you two examples. Like if you're working with performing an aerosol generating procedure on a possible confirmed case, you need disposable gloves. They are saying it's single use. Then disposable fluid repellent coverall or gown, they're saying it's single use. Filtering face piece, respirator, single use. Eye protection, single use. So single use for those equipment which need to be reused. It means a single use, then you decontaminate or do disinfect, does not mean that you discard. So based on your internal SOP, for that session, some of the activities, they say that single or sessional use. So in other words, when you're performing that procedure, then you're not going to use it for another procedure. So you either need to discard or to decontaminate or disinfect. So let's talk about the strategies of optimizing the supply. We are very much aware that there's a shortage of supply, not only in South Africa, but globally because of COVID. And as the situation is evolving and there's increased demand on relevant PPE, which are needed by employees who especially those are frontline employees who need to deal with the patient with COVID. We are aware that manufacturer instruction for most PPE are single use only. However, it's not realistic in this situation. So we advise that employers conduct risk assessment or develop an internal procedure which will help them prevent contamination of PPE which will be reused during multiple donning. Multiple donning is when you take it off, you put it again, you take it off and you put it again without changing to another one. Or for extended use. Extended use, we're talking about wearing it for longer without removing it. And it can be up to 4 to 6 hours. And also storage. Storage, while you're doing multiple donning, the other question is, how do you store this PPE to make sure that they don't get contaminated? So it's very important that you have your own internal policies, because we don't have a standard answer to say how long you should use. And if you have to reuse that equipment, there must be a procedure that prevents that equipment from becoming a source of infection. CDC strategy for optimizing the supply of respirators, they are also recommending extended use, but again, sensitizing those users to avoid discomfort as it's expected, because if you're wearing it for long, and it means that you're not taking it off, so you're not taking breaks in between. By virtue of using PPE, sometimes even the respirator, it can cause a physiological burden to some of the people who have challenges on respiratory challenges and so forth. So In terms of optimizing the supply, CDC is also saying that there are methods which have the potential to decontaminate filtering face piece respirators. They're talking about the UVGI, vaporized hydrogen peroxide, and moist heat. So these are promising techniques. However, they're saying there's no current data which exists to support the effectiveness of these methods. However, the techniques are being validated. There are those who are failing, there are those who are promising, like this one. So, however, many countries, even our country now, there is no facility that has already been set up to do this kind of decontamination. But I know there have been talks between many organizations to really relook at this, even not for COVID, but even for future. So on the other hand, also looked at 3M. They're talking about their feedback on decontaminating methods for their filtering face piece particulate respirators. 3M USA, they do not recommend ethylene oxide because they're saying that it has significant concerns regarding which is associated with off-gassing. They don't recommend the use of ionizing radiation due to degradation of filter performance, microwave due to melting of the respirator near metal components, which ultimately compromise the fit. They also not recommend the use of high temperature autoclave steam due to significant filter degradation. So this is some of the feedback that as people continue to validate methods which can be used to decontaminate, these are some of the feedback coming from the manufacturer of the products. So we know we usually get questions that who sell this PPE. So I have attached a link. The first link is about the South African Protective Equipment Marketing Association. You will find some of the suppliers of PPE on that link. So in addition to that, while we were getting questions is about how do we really know about local suppliers or new PPE manufacturer in South Africa. So we happen to learn that Department of Small Business Development, I gave you the email address, they are busy creating the database. Actually, they have started the database and cleaning and validating supplier is currently ongoing. So in other words, they do have small suppliers or new suppliers who can also help with supplying some of the PPEs. So there was a question on how do we really deal with cotton masks in workplaces. So I'm happy to respond to that the guidelines which I spoke about previously, some of them did touch on homemade PPE, including cotton masks. All of them which I have seen, they consider homemade and they are supported. But all of them, they are saying that they shouldn't be used in a healthcare setting. So in other words, we should try to minimize unnecessary use of PPE, especially surgical masks as public or some of us who do not need them. Then if we do need them, it is because it fits the purpose, because by really doing that, we will make sure that there's enough stock for our frontline employees. So the cotton masks are considered and they are supported for those employees, as I mentioned that this we're talking about PPE in a workplace, they are supported while you're coming to work and going home, and also they can be used by public. So we're also getting many questions about other PPEs which are being made, manufactured, in-house, homemade. How do we comment about that? Our response to this is that all other PPE should fit for purpose and they should be in line with the user requirements. By saying this is because all other PPEs which are used in a workplace, they are really complying with some specific standards. Therefore, to validate, you look at those specifications and the performance requirements. So if this one are not done in line with that, then if you introduce it, then I believe they do some write-up according to the product that they are making. So if it fits the purpose and if it's in line with your requirements, I'm sure you can use that. There was also a question that surgical masks can provide dual function. So in other words, they were saying that it can be changed, when you wear it, you can change sides. If you wear and the blue or the green color is more outside, the perception was it's really containing your droplets from really being expelled in the work environment. But if you wear the other way around, you are protecting yourself from environmental contaminants. We did have confirmed this. We had some talk with some of the reputable product manufacturers, so they are saying it's not correct because the purpose of the surgical mask is its bacterial filtration is for inhaled breath only. So in other words, if you need a different purpose, you want to be protected from an infection source outside or in an environment where you are in, you have to use a different means of protection. And in this case, it's a respirator. So there were different, there were also questions about the difference between a mask and a respirator. So I'm happy to clarify the two. So a surgical mask is the one that we spoke about. Then a respirator is either, in this case for COVID, it's either FFP2, FFP3, N95, N99, and 100. Then there was also a question that, okay, and also the respirators N95, they come at with different shapes. You can see the dark blue one, and we also have the curved shape. So both of them are N95. So it depends on your facial feature and what is it that fits you best in relation to the fit testing performed. There's also a different, there's also a question about using FFP2, which is valved or non-valved. The performance is the same. The valve one just helps to inhale easily. So it is the choice of whether someone is struggling with a cup or still without a valve, especially those who are asthmatic and so forth, it can be advisable that you use a valved one. So the use of, the proper use of respirators, ideally it should be in a respiratory protective program, because employers are supposed to run this program where it includes the policy, which is management support to the program, and employers are assisted in selecting. You conduct medical evaluation to select those who cannot actually use a respirator. There are those who cannot use a respirator, even if they need a respirator for their activity. So those need to be identified early and other alternative means implemented. Training and information is very important, which include the limitation of the equipment that they are given. Then there were some confusion about respirator fit testing, seal check, because some people were wanting to send respirators to us for fit testing. So I'm happy to clarify that seal check, that's what you do every day. And my colleague Taban is gonna demonstrate how to do that when he demonstrates on how to put on a respirator properly. So fit testing is the process or the test which you use to check if a specific respirator can fit you as a person, to confirm if it provides a satisfactory fit around your face and making sure that it's sealed properly. And it also gives you confidence that you are protected by whatever is applied to you. And if that fit testing is not done, you may be wearing the correct respirator for the hazard, but maybe the size or shape is not compatible with your face or your facial features, and that respirator may not really protect you. Then, in this case, because there's a new hazard, then you may also need to do fit testing to confirm which one fit me because maybe you were working in a different department where you were using surgical. Now the outcome of the risk assessment during the review is informing you that you need to use a respirator. So then you used to use a respirator. So last, in the past 2 sessions on PPE, there were questions that a respirator, FFP2 and N95, they are not respirators, they are masks. So I want to really show you that they are actually respirators. They fall in a family of respirators. It's just that we commonly call them masks. I don't know because they are disposable. However, the one that I have staked out is a surgical mask. The other ones are respirators, whether cartridge, half face, or cartridge, full face, the FFP2, the N95 filtering face piece respirator. So I was correct, and I am correct, that N95 and FFP2 are respirators, are not masks. So I want to clarify, how do you really do fit testing? I know that you may not have the time, everyone is running around because of COVID, but it's very important that I share with you how is it done. For those who are aware, please bear with me, but there have been questions on what is fit testing, how do we do it? So it can either be done qualitatively. On my left, right, it's showing that someone is doing a qualitative fit testing where someone responds to the challenge agent and confirm if the respirator fit or not. Then on my right hand, that is a quantitative fit testing which gives result in the form of a fit factor, and the subject does not have control over the test. It uses ambient particle. However, in this current situation with COVID, we are really advised that qualitative may be ideal because it does not really require distraction of respirators which are used in fit testing. So what we do in a quantitative, we probe a hole that will allow us to attach an adapter. So that way it means that the respirator at the end of the test, it may not be used. So if it's not going to be used and we are fit testing 1,000 people, it means that 1,000 respirators has to be discarded. So that's what we're avoiding now. So maybe we can stick to qualitative. So, but you need to also be aware of factors which may affect respirator fit. I have indicated that if you are one of those frontline employees, and you are expected to use FFP2 or N95 respirator, if you have to do fit testing and you still have facial hair or beard, then that respirator won't fit you. So your respirator needs someone who is clean shaven. And again, I'm not really suggesting that people need to be clean shaven because there was a question. So people need to be aware of factors. If you wear a respirator and you're not clean shaven, it's not going to fit you. And if you put it in correctly, it's also not going to fit you, even after the fit test that maybe you have done and you have passed and you show that the respirator fits you. So on my right hand, I'm showing an incorrect respirator size. You can see there that on my chin, the red circle around the chin is too big. It's lower below the chin. And you can see even above, it's way above, so that it may be difficult to wear safety glasses with this respirator because it looks big, and actually it is big. So there are some considerations regarding the use of PPE. It depends on the outcome of the risk assessment. I know that even after this training, people are still going to ask, what PPE do we use for our own people? Do risk assessment, or either use the guidelines which we share from other countries, and you check your activities if they are in line with what has been proposed. PPE should meet standard designs and specifications. In South Africa, there's National Regulator for Compulsory Specifications, which the SABS use when they approve certain products. So if you're using a product which has no design specification, you use that because they are reason in terms of your need or requirements or shortage. But ideally, any PPE should meet a specific standard. PPE should not be used in isolation. That's why we showed you a hierarchy of control, that as the situation is evolving and now we're getting time to really solve the PPE issue. On the other hand, let's try to look at engineering the hazard where feasible. Yes, PPE are less desirable, but in practice, they are commonly used control measures. They are unavoidable during this situation. Hence, it's important that they are supplemented by other controls. And when you select the PPE, you must ensure that you select appropriate in relation to the hazard of transmission. You cannot wear gloves only if it's surface contamination, and on the other hand, there's droplet infection where you're doing aerosolized processes. You will need a respirator. So you may find yourself wearing different PPE for same hazard because there are different routes of transmission. They need to be compatible with other PPE. That, like the example that I gave you, if the one of the equipment is too big, it may affect the other equipment which it should be worn in combination with. Proper fitting is very critical. If you use FFP2 or N95 or equivalent, if fit testing is not done, you may find yourself being exposed without knowing. Information and training, including limitation, is very important for employees to know what is it that is expected when they are issued those PPE. We spoke about proper sequencing. There are many infection sources that can be avoided if you stick or you adhere to proper sequencing in terms of wearing and taking them off. And one shouldn't take for granted, because you can get some unnecessary contamination, therefore, and ultimately get infected. Proper care, maintenance, and disposal of PPE. We were asked in a workplace, how do you really handle PPE in terms of disposing them? We are talking about the biohazard, which is coronavirus. So by virtue of that, we use our medical, we dispose them as medical waste. So there are limitations in terms of PPE because the hazard still exists. And worse is that the use of PPE depends on users' behavior. And if the behavior if the employee or the user of the PPE is not cooperating with the PPE issued, it may defeat the whole purpose. And we should be aware that there is no one equipment to protect against every source of infection. And they should be available. So in this case, there is supply shortages. So we must know that it's one of the limitations and it should be properly used. In some instances, especially where a full gear is expected, then PPE may restrict movement, communication, and so forth. Then it also requires proper maintenance, regular training. So I just want to end by saying that if you are issued with PPE and you're not using them properly, that may create a false sense in your own space where exposure or infection will exist, even if you are wearing the correct type for the hazard. I think it's very important that I acknowledge my colleague in our section, because all those guidelines which I presented to you is their ongoing literature stage. And specific to this presentation, I would really like to acknowledge the 4 people. And also Yaku at 3M for your continued technical support. I think I need to mention this because every time I send you a question, you are very prompt in responding. Of course, I won't forget management, our response team, and our sister company. Thank you very much. And I would like to introduce the next speaker, and Anna is going to talk about the do's and don'ts about gloves.
Okay. Hi everyone, I'm Anna Fury, and today I'm going to talk to you about the do's and don'ts, specifically about gloves. I feel that a lot that I'm going to tell you was mentioned by Juliet, but I think that this is specifically for gloves, so hopefully will still be very helpful. So as was mentioned, controlling exposure is very important, and to do so you need to do a thorough risk assessment of the job essentials and to determine the appropriate use of gloves. It must be shown that the exposure is unavoidable and all other methods of control are not reasonably practical. And especially at this time with the COVID virus, it is impossible to institute some of these measures. So gloves become a possible source of protection. So who must gloves be worn by? Definitely by healthcare workers providing clinical work involving direct care for patients, and should include healthcare workers exposed to human excretions or secretions such as, for example, mortuary workers. Laboratory staff who are handling samples should be protected. Caregivers involved in providing direct care or when handling stool, urine or waste from a COVID-19 patient. Cleaners in healthcare facilities need to be protected, but just not in healthcare facilities, also in laboratories and the care facilities I mentioned earlier. And also health workers in ambulances or transfer vehicles which are involved in transporting patients for suspected COVID-19 disease and are actually involved in transferring these patients. So some of the factors that one needs to consider when selecting the right gloves. It is not just important to wear gloves, but that you wear appropriate gloves. Of course, in this case, they have to be effective against the penetration of microorganisms, and there is a standard, and the AQL must be less than or equal to 1.5. The material the gloves are made of is also very important, and I will talk just now about the appropriateness of either latex, nitrile, or PVC gloves. And the quality of the gloves is extremely important, and the problems that we get from latex gloves now is because gloves of poor quality were used along the processes. The formulation of the gloves and the thickness of the glove material also play a role in protecting against infections. But not only does one have to consider the microorganisms that people like the healthcare workers are exposed to, but also chemicals that are used in the workplace, which have the potential to damage the gloves. There are several standards available to ensure that gloves meet the requirements, and these are some of them: the South African national standards and the American standards for the different types of gloves, and the EN ISO 374.5 is a standard for glove protection against chemicals and microorganisms. So one should look at these standards if they are mentioned on the gloves in order to ensure that the gloves used are appropriate for protection. So let's just look at some of the most commonly used gloves. Natural rubber latex is used to make many different types of gloves: surgical gloves, household gloves, and heavy supported industrial gloves. And they are used for a very good reason. They provide a high degree of protection to infectious agents. They are comfortable and durable, and they have high elasticity, which provides the comfort of these gloves. The only problem with the gloves is that one of the problems of the gloves is that a reaction to the latex molecules in these gloves actually occurs, and occurs in several individuals, and so makes them unpopular for use. And one of the other disadvantages, it is difficult to see when there are tiny holes, puncture holes in the gloves. Now, latex gloves, as I said, are highly protected, so they are still good, but if they are used, the recommendation is that they have to be low latex, powder-free, and good quality gloves, because they do still provide a very good level of protection. Nitrile gloves are very popular, and mostly so because they do not have the rubber latex, the latex particles in them. They are made of carboxylated butadiene acrylonitrile rubber, and they also are available as medical, industrial, and household gloves. They also provide a very high degree of protection to infectious agents. They are comfortable and durable. They are quite puncture resistant, which makes them of good use in the medical setting. They provide good dexterity and sensitivity. They do not contain plasticizers, as is found in the vinyl gloves. And there is no risk, of course, of latex-related sensitivities because they're latex-free. And they also provide protection against various chemicals that may be used in the workplace. The disadvantages is that they give slightly lower dexterity than natural latex gloves. They can be easily torn, and reactions to other additives in the gloves can occur, so additives other than the latex particles. To PVC gloves, they are made of polymer vinyl chloride, and they're available as medical, industrial, and household gloves. However, they do not provide as good a protection against microorganisms as some of the other gloves. The advantages are that there's no risk to latex-related sensitivities or reactions to the other additives, which both the latex and the nitrile gloves may have. They are very comfortable and durable. They are powder-free. They do give good dexterity and sensitivity, and they are optimal for tasks that have a minimal exposure to microorganisms and require frequent glove change. And they provide good protection against most aqueous chemicals and detergents. The advantage, one of the big advantages, is that they are relatively cheap gloves to use. The disadvantages, they are less puncture resistant than either the latex or nitrile. They are easily torn, and in disposing of these gloves, some of the chemicals that are used to manufacture the gloves are actually said to be carcinogenic. And then they have the plasticizers, which reactions can occur to. So some other considerations that one needs to think about when one is using gloves. It does not rule out the importance of hand hygiene, and this must be done before donning and after doffing of gloves. It is highly essential that this occurs, otherwise infections are carried over. Medical gloves are generally single-use items, and it is not recommended that they be decontaminated and reprocessed. The gloves should be changed between patients and even between different treatment activities for the same patient. If you're going from an infected area to a non-infected area, gloves should be changed. And in between, when the gloves are removed, hands should be washed. In routine care of patients, double gloving is not recommended. The washing or rubbing of gloves with hand sanitizers or soaps may affect the integrity of the gloves, so it's important that this is not done. Cleaners in healthcare facilities or caregiving facilities should be heavy-duty gloves. Since these are thicker, they provide some protection against infectious organisms, but different gloves should be used for different areas. And the disinfecting processes for the gloves is very important and should be performed according to suppliers' recommendations. Contaminated gloves can become a means of spreading germs from repeated touching of surfaces. So one should be very careful when one is wearing gloves. They still are a source of spreading infection. Also very important is that when gloves are being worn, for example, for more than 20 minutes, it is recommended that well-fitting cotton gloves be worn beneath them in order to reduce the irritation caused by sweating. The use of oil-based hand lotions or creams may adversely affect the integrity of the latex gloves, so should not be used during the day while gloves are being worn, and should only be used if hands are extremely dry for care once out of the workplace. Gloves should be powder-free, as the powder can promote latex allergy and cause problems with the healing of wounds. And this was one of the original problems with latex gloves, is that there was a powder to which the latex particles attached and aerosolized and then caused respiratory problems. Gloves should also be chosen so that they fit properly. If gloves are too tight, they limit the mobility and the gloves could tear during use because they are overstretched. And if they are too loose, the gloves will do a poor job of keeping out potential pathogens and could get caught in equipment when one is working. So very important that they fit properly. I mentioned vinyl gloves, and I also said earlier, but I re-emphasize, that they are not suitable for healthcare workers that are in direct contact with body excretions or blood. They are suitable in low-risk situations. So, for example, staff completing questionnaires around patients, or if they are handling food, they do provide a good source of protection in these situations. It is also extremely important that there's an effective hand protection program, or we will be finding people with hand dermatitis due to this constant use of glove. And so protection before work is extremely important. And as I said, oil-based creams provide good defense for the hands. It is also important that correct cleansers be used for hand washing to limit the damage to the hands. And as before work, after work skincare is also very important, since hands will be cleaned and washed in many times during the day. Also, it's very important that workers be aware of the early symptoms of skin problems so that these can be limited and not cause extensive damage. And therefore also important that education and training material is available and that people be trained on the proper use and care of all PPE and exposure in the workplace. And of course, good housekeeping and work practices must be emphasized in this training so that you limit the source of exposure by just preventing it from being in the workplace. Disposal of gloves is also very important, and gloves that are contaminated with blood or other potentially infectious material should be discarded in accordance with the facility policy or in a red bag designated for regulated medical waste. In households, waste that is potentially contaminated, for example, tissues, gloves, masks, or handkerchiefs, etc., if there is a COVID-19 patient, these should be discarded in general wastes, possibly in a clear or other plastic bag and sealed. So one should try and prevent the inappropriate and unnecessary use of gloves, especially at this time when supply is so limited. The use of gloves, when not indicated, is a waste of resources and does not reduce transmission. So it is very important that people take note. Health workers doing preliminary screening, for example, completing questionnaires, where there is no direct contact with the patient, social distancing can be maintained. And non-health workers, where contact precautions are not necessary, should not use gloves. Thank you. I would like to introduce Munya, who will do donning and doffing techniques with us. Thank you.
Good day, everyone. I will be going through the proper hand washing and hand sanitizing techniques with you today. So things that we need to consider when washing or sanitizing our hands. First of all, you need to remove any jewelry that may interfere with thorough cleaning of certain areas. Ensure that you've got sufficient amounts of soap or hand sanitizer. Do not use hand sanitizer on visibly dirty hands. So the scrubbing process that occurs during the hand washing and the hand sanitizing process should take place for a minimum of 20 seconds. So if you don't have a timer, you sing the happy birthday song twice. For healthcare workers, this should actually be longer, 40 to 60 seconds. What you do on one hand, you must then do on the other. So after washing or sanitizing your hands, it's very important that you actually apply lotion or creams so as to prevent skin damage caused by frequent hand cleaning. Do not use any oil-based gloves, oil-based lotions under gloves, as they may damage gloves. So it's recommended that you use aqueous creams. Hand washing should be the first choice of cleaning hands when you've got access to clean water. Some people may ask, does the water temperature actually matter? It turns out not. It does not appear to affect the microbe removal. So during the hand washing process, the lathering and scrubbing of hands creates friction, which helps to lift dirt, grease, and microbes from the skin. Microbes are present in all surfaces of the hand, often in particularly high concentrations under the nails. So it's very important to note that long nails may actually hinder the thorough cleaning of these areas. And in fact, in healthcare workers, it is actually recommended that you have short nails. So the rinsing process is essential to removing dirt, grease, and microbes. Hands should be dried thoroughly after washing, as germs can be transferred more easily to and from wet hands. So let's go through the hand washing steps together. So step number 1, we wet our hands with water. Number 2, you apply enough liquid or bar soap to cover all the hand surfaces. Number 3, rub hands palm to palm. Step 4, right palm over left dorsum with fingers interlaced and vice versa. Step number 5, palm to palm with fingers interlaced, and then perform the rubbing motion. Step number 6, rotational rubbing of left thumb clasped in right palm and vice versa. Step number 7, backs of fingers to opposing palms with fingers interlocked. Number 8, rotational rubbing back and forth with clasped fingers of right hand in left palm and vice versa. Step number 9, rinse your hands with water. Number 10, dry thoroughly with a single-use towel. And then 11, you can actually use that towel to actually turn off the tap. And then number 12, you now have your clean hands. Do not forget to apply lotion. So now let's actually go through the steps using the video demonstration. As you can see, the person has actually used a towel to just open the tap. Ensure that you actually close the tap because the scrubbing process takes about 20 seconds, and you know South Africa is a water scarce country. So as we go on now, right hand over, right palm over left dorsum. Then now we're doing the rubbing palm to palm. We're cleaning our thumbs. Now we're cleaning the insides of our fingers. What you do on one hand, you do on the other. We're cleaning our palms and also our fingertips by making rotational back and forward motions. After that, you use a towel to open up your tap. Rinse your hands thoroughly. Importantly, you shouldn't use the same paper towel to actually clean your hands. You need a fresh paper towel to clean your hands. Use that paper towel to close the tap and discard in the general waste. Okay, So let's go on to the hand sanitizing steps. They are very similar to those of hand washing, apart from the fact that we're not using water or soap. So the first step, you apply a sufficient amount of hand sanitizer. So it should be sufficient enough to cover all the hand surfaces. So depending on which hand sanitizer you could have a thumb press or an elbow press. And then step number 2, rub your hands palm to palm. Step number 3, right palm over left dorsum with interlaced fingers and vice versa. Step number 4, palm to palm with fingers interlaced. Step number 5, the backs of fingers to opposing palm with fingers interlocked and vice versa. Step number 6, rotational rubbing of the left thumb clasped in right palm and vice versa. Step number 7, rotational rubbing back and forth with clasped fingers to right hand in palm and vice versa. So step number 8, once your hands are dry, they are then safe to use. So let's proceed to watch a video demonstration of this. Ensure that you apply sufficient amounts suitable for your hand. This is size of hand dependent. You have the palm of one over the other with the fingers interlaced, performing a rubbing motion. Palm to palm with the fingers interlaced, performing a rubbing motion. The backs of opposing fingers to the other, perform rotational motions. Cleaning of the thumb. Cleaning of the fingertips on the palm of the other, making rotational back and forth motions. And now your hands are clean. Do not forget to apply hand lotion, as you know that frequent hand washing can actually harm or damage your hands. Okay, thank you. I am now going to introduce my colleague, Mr. Tabang, who's going to demonstrate the donning and doffing of gloves, of respirators.
Thank you, Mia. Good day, everyone. So I'll be taking you on the donning and the doffing of respirator and gloves. So I'm going to start with the gloves. So I'll be using the nitrile disposable gloves in this case. So the first thing to remember before donning the gloves, your hands must be clean. Make sure that your hands must be clean before you touch the PPE, any other PPE. So in this case, you make sure your hands are clean, you make sure your hands are free of any germs, and then when selecting the gloves, you make sure that you select the correct size of the gloves that fits your hand, because it is important to avoid any tear or damage of the gloves, and also for any discomfort or a freedom of movement for the hands while operating or doing whatever you're doing. So I'm going to start by donning the gloves now. So when you don the glove, you select one glove and then you insert the glove properly, and then you adjust the wrist area to make sure that it's covered, and then adjust to check if the fingers are also well placed, and then you inspect your glove to make sure that there's no tear or any visible damage, and then from there you can proceed to the next glove, and then you use the same technique you used to don the first glove. Make sure that you cover your wrist area, and then also you make sure to check any visible tears or any damage. So if your gloves are good, then you're good to go. So now we're coming to the most important part, which is the donning of the gloves. So now the glove is contaminated. So the aim here is to make sure that you take off the gloves without contaminating any surface of your skin. So I'm going to demonstrate to you the two techniques for removal of gloves. So the first one is recommended by the World Health Organization. So I'm going to start. When you start, you make sure you pinch the glove on the wrist area, and then you peel it away from the hand and turn it inside out, and then you hold the other glove with the gloved hand, and then now you use your finger, you slide the finger, touching the inside of the glove to avoid touching the outside, which is contaminated, and then you slowly peel the glove away from the hand to cover the first glove, to open it inside out, and then that's it. You throw it into your biohazard waste container. So that one was the first one, which is recommended by the World Health Organization. So now I'm going to demonstrate the big method, which is also very effective. So for donning, I'll use the same technique. Make sure that the wrist area is covered, no visible tears. The same technique again. Make sure that your wrist area is covered. So with the picking method for the doffing of the glove, so it's more like the same technique. So in this one, you do what we call an L, and then you place your hands like this, and then what you do with the L, you touch the edge of the glove towards the wrist area, and then you use the other finger, you grab the glove, and then now you avoid touching the area of contaminated glove, and then what you do what we call a B, and then you cover the glove with, now you have the B, what we call a B. So what we do, this is the clean side of the glove now. So with the clean side of the glove, you touch the edge of your gloves, and then you touch it, you hold it and peel it away from the hand into the biohazard bin without touching the outer surface, which is the dirty area. And then with the other hand, you just do it like this and use the finger. Remember, this side is now clean. You just peel it away and throw it into the biohazard bin. Then you are good to go. So that was it for the gloves. So now we come to the respirators. So the respirators I have today here, I have the N95 respirator, the cup shape, and the V-flex. So there are different techniques in donning these two gloves because they are different. So I'll start with the little bit difficult one, which is the V-flex. So the standard procedure, before you touch any PPE, you make sure that your hands are clean. So in this case, you clean your hands, and then you take out the respirator from the box, you inspect it for any default or visible tear, and then with this one, which is a V-flex, what you do, you place the fingers of both hands on the nose piece. There is a metal on the thing, which is the nose, we call it the nose piece. You place both fingers with your thumbs underneath. So what you do, you hold it and you select the middle, and then you bend the respirator in the middle slightly, and then after that, you unfold the respirator by pulling the bottom part downwards and the top part with the nose piece upwards, and then you make sure that the straps are placed on the top panel. So what you do, with one hand, you take the respirator, you place it onto your face, the top part with the nose piece on the bridge of your nose, and then the bottom part to cover your chin. So with the other hand, you're going to pull the first thread and place it below the ear, and then pull the second thread and pull it over your head just above your ears, and then use the tabs on the side to adjust for proper fit. And then after that, you now adjust the nose piece to the size or the shape of your nose by using both fingers, the fingers from both hands. You start by adjusting from the top, slowly going down up until it is adjusted for the shape of your nose. Then after that, you do what we call a seal check. So with the seal check, you place both hands into the respirator, you exhale or breathe out sharply to check if there's any air coming out. So in this case, if there's any air coming out on the top, what you do, you adjust the nose piece, and if there's any air maybe coming on the side, you can use the tabs or adjust your straps. And then after that, you perform the seal check again. If there's no leakage, then you are good to go. So now coming to doffing of the respirator. So remember now, the front part of the respirator is contaminated. So what you have to do, make sure you do not touch this area. So how do you do that? You use your fingers, you slide, you remove the first thread, you hold it, and then use the left finger to pull the second thread without touching the respirator, and then safely dispose it into the biohazard waste. That's for the V-flex, which seems a little bit tricky, but now I'm going to demonstrate the last one, which is the cup-shaped N95 respirator, which most of people are more familiar with it. So you take it from the box like the other one with clean hands, and then you hold it with the palm of your hand with your fingers at the edge towards the nose piece, and then you let the straps hang up freely. And then the next step, you place the respirator onto your nose, onto your face, with the nose piece at the bridge of your nose, and then the bottom part covering your chin. So with this one, with the other hand, you now pull the first strap, place it over your head, and then you pull the second strap, place it under or below your ear on the neck, and then you check for property, and then now you do what you call a seal check. So you now adjust the nose piece from the top, and then you perform the seal check by placing both hands onto the respirator and exhaling sharply. If there's any air coming out on top, you adjust the nose piece. And then if there's any other air coming from any part except the nose piece, you use the strap to adjust. And then after that, you perform the seal check to verify if there's no air coming out. And then after that, you are good to go. So when taking off the cup-shaped respirator, it's the same thing. You slide your finger, pull the first thread, hold it, and then pull the second thread without touching the respirator, and safely dispose it into the biohazard bin. And then from there, you are done. You wash your hands, and that's it. Thank you.
Okay, this needs to be adjusted. Is the battery not working? Okay, so I'm just going to do that. Is it okay? So apologies for that. I'm just going to quickly use the chair. Thank you, Glenn. So that was the sequence of proper selection and use of PPE by a colleague, Jeanette Mangani, the do's and don'ts of gloves by Anna Fourie, the demonstration by Munya Muvali on hand washing and sanitizing, which was critical before the demonstration of donning and doffing of gloves and respirators. So briefly, I'm going to ask my colleague Glenn just to quickly flash on the screen the resources that is required, but whilst he's doing that, to remind you that the complete list of references used around PPE, and many of them have been updated this year, quite a number of them also even in April 2020. This particular list, we will ensure that we place this also on the website for you in order for you to be able to get hold of the most up-to-date guidelines with regard to PPE use. So the resources that you see on screen now will be the websites, links to those websites, as well as the hotline details. And particularly, I want to highlight for you, and there will be specific slides also on our own website where you'll find these resources. So at the top of the screen now, you will see the link to a number of websites. Firstly, our own, nih.ac.za, our sister institute that leads the clinical and laboratory support around the COVID-19 crisis, NICD, that is nicd.ac.za, the National Department of Health, the broader Department of Health website, health.gov.za, the World Health Organization, the Centers for Disease Control, and the International Labour Organization. Critically are the four hotlines that you see at the bottom. The first one is our own National Institute for Occupational Health, NIH's Occupational Health Practitioners, OHP hotline, and the numbers there is 0800 111132. Please use those calls. We are particularly offering that to those particular professionals who are part of the cornerstone of our national occupational health and safety response, including the occupational practitioners. The NICD public hotline is probably very well known, and then there's the NICD healthcare workers hotline. Please, it is that correct? 082883. We will add the other digits to that for you in a moment. And then for the COVID-19 queries, please, if you do not get all of your questions into the chat box at the bottom of the Zoom screen where you need to type your questions, that email address, info@nih.ac.za, is an important email address. It is our COVID-19 email address at the NIH. And then, Glenn, could we just quickly get the NIH website slides on to show our participants? And today, whilst Glenn is preparing that, we again have set a record for the number of Zoom participants on the NIH's Zoom platform for COVID-19. The slide you see now, I need to bring it to your attention. Our Zoom platform has done good in reaching quite a lot of our target audience. This is another key platform where our Zoom session resources are shared with you. It is our NIH website. And on this website, all the presentations are in fact there. All these Zoom recordings, audio and video is there. And you will find all the frequently asked questions. You'll find the fact sheets, the posters, the infographics, and links to other resources and websites. Those are the resources that even some of my colleagues who presented now indicates is updated continuously. At the bottom of the resources, we'll have a date to say that that is the resource that was updated on the 6th of April and how. If you can just go back to the previous slide, Glenn. In the banner of the COVID icons and graphics, you will see the hotline number that is the complete number for you. This is on our website. Please visit our website as soon as the Zoom session is done. You will find a lot of the resources, including today's resources, will be added under the videos and under the presentations. So the hotline number is 0800 212175. 0800 212175. Thanks, Glenn. So you will find a quick run through on the next slides of the other resources. We have the NIH resources COVID-19, which is the box on the left-hand side. In the middle is the occupational health and safety resources from the National Department of Health. And then we have the fact sheets on that one. The next slide will give you an idea of the NIH resources we've developed over the last couple of weeks, and they're continuously being updated. Please visit these resources, because see the relevant ones there from the access for visitors. And don't forget that very same procedure and flow diagram, as well as the questionnaire form that is contained on this web page, is relevant for your returning employees who might have been on lockdown, working from home, or self-isolating, who needs to disclose that my spouse at home might have shown symptoms or might have been COVID positive. Those screening tools will sort it out. This is the National Department of Health and Safety COVID-19 resources and specific national regulations. We will be adding the regulation hazardous biological agents hopefully later today for you, and you know where to find the other regulations. These are the many fact sheets that we have there. It is occupation specific and general. You see that we also try to look at translation into some of the more dominant and popular languages. We will try to do as much translations as we can under the circumstances. And then I think this is the final slide on the frequently asked questions. We add your questions you're asking us today in the chat box, and when you're registered, whatever comes from there that is not duplicated, we add to our FAQ section. I'm not sure if there's one more slide there, and then this is the training videos, and we will, from time to time, we are not always on top of it, but add our training schedule as it emerges. We tend to finalize our training schedule towards the end of the week for the following week. And then here you see the audio SoundCloud clips that you can download as well. And then I think finally is it the presentations. This is the, I'm not sure if this is video and audio. Glenn, to see if there's another slide. This is the audio one. And the next slide deals with the infographics. You'll see it's specifically for those who are high-risk categories, including cleaners, teachers, emergency medical services, health workers, and correctional services. And as more becomes available, we'll be uploading that with the support of our IT team here at the NIH. Thank you. Those are some of the key resources that I need to share with you. And now I need to ask all my colleagues to join me here in front so we can deal with some of the questions that you've asked. A lot of it, I'm sure, has been covered by our presentations, but we'd like to engage with you. So if our colleagues could just bring along chairs and we'll give us a second or two just to rearrange. We would need to zoom out. It's not working. It's stuck. Okay. There's no way to actually undo that. Okay, so we will manually do an adjustment. I'll use this. Our colleagues in the screen. I'm going to ask lenses to see how far back we can move the camera. Okay. At least the three of you can see. So if you give us a manual, they assist us as people answer. Ladies, is that okay? Okay. Our team has basically had to get the sort of Zoom technology sorted over the last week or so, and therefore we still having a few glitches, but thank you. Can we look at the questions? Okay, from Sheena O'Brien, we've got a question that asks, what is the NIH's view on procuring cloth masks for employees to wear? And maybe I could ask my colleague Jeanette to start with that one.
I believe we have addressed this. This is not the NIH view, but looking at different guidelines, it is more like cloth masks are really considered for non-health workers, and especially employers, including employees who come to work and from work to home. So our view is in relation to what is available out there, as I have shared some of the guidelines which are going to indicate why this concept is being supported.
Okay, so Nisha, you just look at the next question. So Victor Mortali is asking, availability is still a challenge, and that would be, I assume, the availability of PPE. What about a resuscitable cloth made by volunteers?
I think this ties onto the same question previously, which Janet answered. I think the important thing to know that from an employee perspective, the cloth mask does not offer a high protection factor as a surgical mask or a respirator, and that's something to keep in mind. The use of the cloth mask is rather to stop the droplet spread from people as opposed to protecting the employee from inhaling those droplets.
You will add something to that, Jenny? Okay? Okay. So from Natalie February, we've got a question that deals with, please elaborate if sanitizer should be used on gloves. I would assume the concern would be gloves get contaminated, and would the sanitizer be okay to use on the glove? And this person, I've seen people wearing gloves, just opposite me, also putting sanitizer on top of the gloves.
So it isn't recommended that sanitizers be used, as they can affect the protective barrier of the gloves.
Okay, so that's a very clear, straightforward answer. Our next question is related to the employer. Is the employer obligated to provide PPE, masks, gloves, to the workers for traveling to work purposes? And so maybe I should separate the question both at work and as a separate question for traveling to work purposes. I would assume this is essential services.
Absolutely, it is the responsibility of the employer to provide PPE at the workplace. So the second part is it the employer's responsibility to provide PPE as they come to work and they leave work to home. That is something that I don't have the reference material as we are guided by the OSH Act in terms of the duties of the employer. However, during this time of COVID and considering the situation at hand, that can be some of the internal processes which can be initiated by employers where feasible. Then if they are able to provide, they can. However, there is no way that I can make a direct or precise reference in the regulation or the act.
Thank you, Julie. The next question is by Mapula Ramadike. I've just found out from the Department of Labour Facebook page that there must be not just the use of dust mask, any other mask except the N95 respirator or surgical mask. Why can't we use any other masks? Okay, so the next question is, there's a severe shortage of PPE. So how do we go about providing required PPE in the light of this?
We are very much aware of the shortage, and we share the same frustration, and we are trying by all means to understand who are the other suppliers despite the ones that are well known, And as we get information, that's why we are sharing, so that you look around, not necessarily your main supplier. So I believe that as the demand is increasing, we believe that also those suppliers are looking for stock somewhere. So keep checking with everyone available, maybe you get some of the things that you're looking for.
Also, where possible, if the problem can be engineered out, that's the first prize. You know, if it's a simple plastic screen that can be used, social distancing can be used, washing your hands, hand sanitizing, because there is a shortage, try to look at all the other alternatives first, other than resorting to the PPE.
Okay, there is a question with regard to the disposal of gloves by Bonnie. I have a question with regards to the disposal of used masks and gloves. Should they be classified as biological waste? Or second question relates to the laundromats that washes the PPE on behalf of the companies that are providing the essential service. How best we protect them?
I think Anna, you covered it.
Yeah. Anything you want to emphasize on that question? Laundries?
I'm not sure. Laundries.
So the laundry can pose a risk depending on how they are loading the material into the machines. So if there is any potential for any particles to be generated during that process, then they should have PPE. There are some alternatives that's being looked at in terms of material, plastic bags or bags that can dissolve in the water, but that's still being investigated.
Okay, so our next question is going to deal with the severe shortage of PPE. So how do we, I think we've answered that question. Yeah. Following that, I work in a private hospital, but I'm not employed by them. So this is clearly a contract worker or a particular person doing specific tasks. Who is responsible to provide PPE to me? Is it the hospital, or must I bring my own to the operating theatre?
I believe, based on this explanation, you are a contractor. So if you're working under a certain employer, obviously they will seek your job, your safety file, and they also specify PPE which are necessary to operate under their own responsibility. As much as the main employer is where you are working, however, your direct employer is responsible to meet the requirement of the secondary or the employer in charge of your workplace.
And I think this is a related question, but about working from home, as I guess is essential workers. You go to the office, but if you're working from home, does PPE applicable? Should the employer be responsible?
I believe so. If you sort of moved offices, because now you're operating remotely, the only difference is going to be the exposure or the hazard, because you are home, and whatever you're dealing with at home during your work period, or it is viewed as you are working, you are in the workplace, you just moving offices, so the employer is responsible to provide PPE in that regard.
Mm-hmm. And the next question regarding the permit that's required. Companies manufacturing surgical masks, do they require permission to do so, and is that being dealt with via any other government department?
I think here they're talking about approval. That's my understanding, because unless it's the permit to supply the country, because that I'm not aware of, but it's about approving surgical masks. There is national regulator for compulsory standards, which SAB has to operate around it when they really approve these products. So obviously, when you produce something, you need to know what are the local standards and specifications which you need to comply with.
The next question is, should screening not be compulsory for all employees, for all workers who enter into the workplace to identify potential risks to individuals?
Well, firstly, I think that all employees need to be educated that should they be symptomatic, they should stay at home. So there is no need to do screening for employees because they should know they should not be coming to work. And should there be a need for them to come to work because they're presenting with mild symptoms, then they should be wearing a surgical mask.
The next question, I see elimination of the hazards. When we talk of hazards, what are we referring to? The patient, and I think this is both an amusing question as well. The concept of elimination would be applicable not to the carrier of the germ or the disease or the virus. Clearly, we're referring to the elimination of the virus, the biological hazard. Jeanette?
I'm just not sure it's all about elimination of virus.
I mean, the elimination is the removal of the actual viral particle, the virus, the agent. And because if we are working in healthcare, we can't take the patient away. We can't sometimes remove or eliminate the virus. So therefore, we need to look at the alternate steps, whether we can substitute or whether we can engineer. If not, then we will.
So, how much of our PPE is imported? It should be trusted money. So, is it all imported or some of it manufactured within our own country? And can we trust all the imported ones? Is the specific emphasis?
I have no answer to this question because, I mean, there are local distributors and there are also manufacturers in the country. So it cannot be 100%, but I don't have a specific percentage of how much PPE is really imported. So in terms of trusting 100%, I wish I knew, unfortunately not. So what I would advise is just you need to check the performance requirement in relation to specification of the product that you're actually procuring. Oftentimes, there are documentation that are supporting these products. So if you are in doubt, there are some of the organizations, especially with FFP2 or European approved filtering phase respirators, which you can confirm their efficacy and protecting. However, if it's N95, which is NIOSH and FDA cleared, they aren't in the facility in the country to confirm that. And in terms of the other PPE, like your gowns and gloves, I have no idea when we can confirm efficacy or effectiveness before use.
So I'm not sure the next question deals with PPE for the general public. If you've covered that, because a lot of people are talking about cloth masks, people are manufacturing them. It is recommended that this mask should not be used for the high-risk category of workers. Do we have guidelines with regard to the PPE for public?
So in terms of the cloth mask, there is some guidelines on the CDC website, the Centers for Disease Control, in terms of how to make these cloth masks. In terms of PPE for the general public, I think the general public should stay at home and maintain their social distance, so there is no real need for them to wear it because there is a shortage for the essential workers currently. So unless they're going to use the cloth mask, we should as Anna and as Janet has stated in their presentations, we need to make sure that PPE is available for the essential workers.
Okay. The question relates to the manufacturers in the chemical industry, and I'm not sure what the specific question is. So let's move to the next one. Is surgical mask good for healthcare workers in this COVID-19 context?
Yes, if the task or the activities require the use of surgical mask. So we cannot just generalize if the activity or the job requires a respirator, you need to use a respirator. Any PPE should fit the purpose.
The next question deals with to what extent does Section 8 of the Occupational Health and Safety Act apply to employees working from home? What is the responsibility of the employer in this instance? I
think they can go as far as making sure that they provide the necessary requirement in terms of the duties of the employer. However, it is well known, or maybe it is understandable, that they may not have control over the structure and all the necessary things that are in your house, because as opposed to you being in a workplace where everything is protected, under that act or relevant regulations. But otherwise, you are still classified as an employee, or the responsibility of health and safety lies with the employer, even if you are working at home.
And my sense is that given COVID-19, I think the employer must set a standard. I think in our labor relations session, Dr. from Sasson suggested for home, working from home, but COVID-19 specific standard, as you just indicated, not everything can be controlled on, so that the risk assessment of the employer covers that broadly and generally. And I think, as Tanisha said, stay at home, and the social distancing and hand hygiene, cough and sneeze hygiene is probably critical in that, those sort of standard guidelines. With regard to, was it FFP2, FFP3 and N95? Could you explain the difference on that? I think we again.
Absolutely. FFP2 is equivalent to N95. FFP2, the filtration efficiency is 94%, hence it's equivalent to N95, because N95 filters at least 95% of the particles. So FFP3 is equivalent to N99, which you have not mentioned there. So in other words, the filters at least 99% of the particles.
And then the next question deals with, just waiting for, there we go. It's a concern that we refer to PPE for those already diagnosed with COVID. If we have been seeing asymptomatic transmission of the virus, why are we not protecting all screening and clinical staff? Because until results return, we will not know if the patient attended is positive or not.
I think ideally that's what we would like to do. Like as Janet said, we need to look at the risk. We also need to look at the availability of our PPE. And currently there's a shortage, but even for those that's performing high risk activities where aerosols are being generated.
And then the next question is, what about teachers and learners in the context of large and overcrowded classes? Would screening tools be critical here at first, so that any teaching and support staff in the schools, universities, and other places or educational places would be screened by the school management and the employer in that sense, as well as applying a screening tool for the pupils, the learners, for the students arriving at the universities, particularly post-lockdown?
Yeah, I think it could work, but again, education is critical here, particularly for learners. If they are sick, they should stay at home. Teachers, if they are sick, they should stay at home, because that reduces the risk of the virus coming into the workplace.
Okay. The temperature test for employees and customers at the workplace, what are the health and safety regulations must be adhered to, or which health and safety regulations? Is this allowed in South Africa if you identify it in your risk assessment as a measurement tool?
In temperature testing is not explicitly mentioned in any regulation or the act. I think it's the responsibility of the employer to define what sort of screening method they will use in their workplaces. I don't have a specific reference which has been communicated by other Department of Employment and Labour, unless I have missed some updates.
And then again, I think, as Tanisha emphasized, we have a scenario where there is the whole package of containment measures. Measuring the temperature is going to be one of a series of things we need to do, and therefore we need to consider all of that together. It's not the only thing we do.
And also to know that all people don't present with the same symptoms. So someone may be coming through that's not presenting with fever at that point in time.
Okay, so the CDC has advised on cloth masks in certain cases, keeping in mind this is a North American context. Poor social distancing in public areas, I think the question is referring to. The Western Cape has had recommendations regarding these from some academics. Please place cloth masks in good context to prevent confusion, thank you. I think we started addressing that, and that cloth masks could pose both a potential protection, but also a potential hazard in contamination perhaps happening as well. And there's probably no clear set of guidelines how to use these cloth masks.
There is some guidance on the CDC website in terms of its use, but then again, it does pose a risk if it's not handled properly, if it's not washed properly. So those are all factors that needs to be taken into consideration. And
the length of time that people use, etc. How they've done and how they've off. What is the difference between N95 and surgical masks according to the Irish? And that was probably the reference to the changing in different standards.
Okay, I don't have the standard with me to check specifically there, but I believe the Irish or Americans or South Africans may define, may differentiate the two similar way or if not the same way. Let me check. It's the difference between N95 and the surgical mask. So the surgical mask is a mask. It contains your droplets as you exhale. So it does not work two ways. It works one way. So if you, in this context of COVID, if you are symptomatic, it's ideal that you put on a surgical mask. So the N95 respirator works both ways. You can contain your infectious droplets if you're symptomatic. At the same time, you can also be protected from infected sources or people who are sick around you. So the difference is the other one protects you even from the infectious source outside your breathing environment, but the other one does not provide the protection if you're worried about other people and other infectious sources.
And for that participant, we will definitely be putting this including the Health Protection Surveillance Centre in Ireland's guidelines that's dated the 20th of March 2020. The next question is, if we address efforts by volunteers on the provision of PPE for both qualifying general population, the country is looking outside the country for salvation, but the good of local expertise is really necessary.
I think it's very important that we look at the quality of PPE that is produced, and that they are at the correct standards to be used for protection, otherwise it actually doesn't.
If it's not going to meet the standards, that's something we should preferably avoid. What type of disinfectant or gadgets do you use to decontaminate ambulances that has been used to transfer confirmed COVID-19 cases for potential suspect COVID-19 cases? What about the paramedics after dropping off the patient? What would our guidelines be there?
So there is a particular protocol to follow, and we can make that available on our website as well. A washdown and of the vehicle with the disinfectants that is approved by the EPA and the WHO.
Okay. Well, we have about 7 minutes left of this particular session, and we'll see if we can deal with some more questions in that period. And then the rest of the questions will deal in the frequently asked questions, as I've indicated on our website. There seems to be a difference of opinion, this participant says, on the valved respirators. Without a valve, what is the United advice on with and without valves on respirators?
My understanding is that both valved and unvalved, they offer the same protection as per their performance requirements. The difference is that the valved one allows filtered air to go out from the respirator easily as opposed to the other one. However, it does not allow backward airflow by inhalation. So you shouldn't be worried about that. And again, the valve has been tested for leak. So in other ways that whatever you're exhaling does not just go through the valve, it's only filtered air that goes out. So that's the difference. So if you're struggling to wear a respirator, a valve one may be much better for you.
Thank you, Jude. So training related to healthcare staff at primary healthcare level and the clinics. Can you just go slightly up? Other way? No. Okay, so patients will present with symptoms at the clinics, and the nurses at the primary healthcare facilities also go out to homes for testing. What's our recommendation with regard to frontline healthcare workers at primary healthcare level? Would all the package of containment and prevention measures be applicable?
So if they are going out to the homes, they are unaware of what the risks are going to be when they get to the particular homes. So in that case, it would be important for them, I would think.
Yeah. So subject to the supply of PPE, they will need to take all the precautions. Okay. So how do we deal with PPE in the buildings? Workers are in close proximity of each other when performing tasks. Separation and distance is very difficult. Now, clearly, under lockdown, they will all not be working. And this might be a question applicable once the lockdown is done and return to work.
And if social distancing is difficult, then they need to look at what are other mitigation factors that they could implement. I mean, like we said, there could be screenings, but if you have not been able to mitigate the risk out, then the last resort may be PPE. Otherwise, then you are putting the employee at risk.
So for the participant relating to the construction question, because keep in mind, we have in all of our Zoom training sessions emphasize the importance of the risk assessment, the COVID-19 risk assessment that your employer must undertake and conduct. And that risk assessment will spell out all the details that Tanusha has just quickly summarized for us. So how frequently should masks and gloves be changed after use?
Unfortunately, there is no standard answer. It is based on the activities and the likelihood of those PPE becoming contaminated and becoming an infection source. So your risk assessment or your internal SOP should determine. You should establish that by doing something in your workplace to inform the frequency of changing.
I think if one is looking at gloves and they're single-use gloves, they should be removed and disposed of, not only after moving from a patient, for example, but also if you are working from a dirty area to a clean area in the same patient, that should be changed and disposed.
And I think in Anna's presentation, there's also an emphasis on where you're dealing with COVID-19 positive patients, that you must only use the once-off PPE that would have to be discarded immediately. Now, for non-clinical scenarios and non-hospital and non-high-risk categories, you need to seriously check if your risk assessment is going to indicate if you need to require to use gloves. The next question deals with please provide clarity on the use of cloth masks. I think we've covered that question. Security guards is indicated there, and if they do not require this to be very important. I think on a visit over the weekend to the local supermarket, most of the major chain stores now got a plastic square that is hanging between the person collecting the card or money and the actual client. So it's a very simple sort of barrier that's hanging from the fishing line from the top at the height that people are speaking and so on. And so those are the innovative stuff that's happening for aerosolizing procedures. Is planning a new first aid box that has doctor or professor has brought up. And those are critical things for you at the workplace to consider what is most appropriate. In some of the stores, people have these disposable plastic visors that are also placed over their faces. Okay, so the next question deals with PPE again. Is there a procedure for washing PPE for reuse? And clearly, here the broad term PPE is used. Clearly, PPE are masks, gloves, visors, and other forms of protection. Can any of these things be reused and washed? I know there's caution about the attempt to clean N95 around the surgical mask, but that is not advised as per the presentation as well.
Unfortunately, not washing. The washing, the guideline which spoke about washing requirements, it was about the cloth masks. That one that ideally you can have two and you wash one and you iron, and while you're using another one. So in terms of the workplace and the PPE which are following specific standards and guidelines, as far as washing, we don't have an answer. We don't know any of those requirements.
Well, the general provision of the general safety regulation is that PPE should be maintained in a good condition as well as cleaning condition by the employer. So have a conversation amongst yourselves as employer and employee reps and make a decision about which of the PPE you would need to ensure is contained and not sent home with the employee, which may create other problems. That was my buzz of my phone saying it's 1 o'clock. And that means, unfortunately, we'll have to close this particular session of the National Institute for Occupational Health's COVID-19 Zoom training session. Our particular topic today, as a reminder, was the training session about all the questions around PPE, and we have attempted in this session to respond to all the questions you've also asked in previous sessions, Zoom sessions around PPE. And I need to congratulate my colleagues for having updated their presentations and sought the literature reviews in order to give you the most up-to-date details. So on that point, I want to thank my colleagues who are unfortunately not on screen at the moment. That's Munia Muvali and Tabang Juba for their demonstrations on hand washing and sanitizing, and demonstration donning and doffing, and the panel that we have here now, Dr. Tanusha Singh, Furi, as well as Jeanette Mangani, next to me here, from myself, Ashton Director of the NIHS Training, Occupational Safety Training Manager. Thank you for joining us today on this Zoom session. We will see you tomorrow when we deal with issues of health and wellness and mental health in the workplace in this difficult time of national disasters, lockdowns, and the general global COVID-19 pandemic. And on Thursday, as Tanusha reminded us earlier, we'll also be dealing with, please remind me the topic.
The roles and responsibilities of management towards COVID.
So please join us. We will be sending out these invites and reminders with programs and so on. Our process now is for you to pre-register. And once you've pre-registered, you will receive an email from my colleague Tabani saying, this is the link. And please register early. We thank you for joining us. Goodbye.